Test, test. Thanks, Alec. Oh, man, I hate that. All right, in my defense, the sound was not muted. This has happened a couple times now. The Blue Yeti microphone has a bad interaction with Mac OS. And I think it's any time I've disconnected the USB and I reconnect it, I have to go into the sound settings and just adjust the input volume in some way. Turn it up, turn it down a little bit, works like a charm. But everything else looks good, you know? And if I don't check OBS for my sound levels before I start, because why would I? I'm just doing the same thing I do every day. Oh, that's, you know, a little embarrassing. I'm sitting here monologuing as if I've got a, as if people can hear me. Wonderful. All right, let me, okay, yep. Probably gotta jump. How far in were we? 2 minutes in. Alright, well, what the hell was I saying? First of all, I said hello, welcome, and I gave my standard intro. I was talking about how I got the vaccination, because I was basically vamping for time for people to show up. So I got my second vax, it sucked. Saturday was a total loss. I had the chills and the sweats and the aches. But 2 weeks from now, I'll be free to kiss people on the streets again. Thank you. It's funny, I'm kind of behind a lot of my friends in the U.S., but I've got friends in Europe, and they're, not rolling out as fast, so I'm feeling pretty hashtag blessed. Any folks from the EU in chat want to chime in on how that's going? I haven't talked to anybody lately, but the last I heard. I gotta say, I was pretty proud of at least the city of Austin. I got it through the city, not through, we also had things like HEB, which is one of the best grocery stores in the world, and is only in Texas, but if you know, you know. HEB had the vaccinations rolling up in the 40s. All right, so y'all are where we were maybe month and a half ago, if I'm remembering right. Yeah. But, you know how it is in the U.S., we're always a little bit down on ourselves, especially when it comes to government things, and City of Austin had a pretty amazing setup going. Had a big kind of a community center. It's really well put together pipeline, bringing people through, getting their vaccinations. They even automatically scheduled me for my follow-up, sent me a text message and an email telling me when and where to show up. It was really well done, and it made me really proud. It gave me some, red, white, and blue pride to see government working that well. So I was happy about that. It was really good. Feels like we fuck up more often than not these days, but this was a real win. All right, so we got a couple people here. I think we might as well dive into what we're doing today. And let me mark the time. All right. So we have been cranking for the past couple of weeks on product concept, what to do next with Citizen. And I'm going to kind of try to tell the story from my perspective now that I feel like I've gotten somewhere. I think I'm ready here. I think I know what we should do. And I feel good about it. And I think that it's a direct result of spending this time that we spent for the past couple of weeks. Wasn't easy or fun necessarily. It's way more fun to just keep on working on features, keep on building things out, keep that sense of momentum going. So having to step back and kind of give everything the bird's eye look and evaluate whether or not we're making the right call is always hard. But at the end of last month, at the end of April, I was just looking at where we were and feeling like, now we don't really have a product yet. Now here's the reason that things turned out that way. The initial concepts that I was looking at for Citizen to be kind of at the core of like what's unique about it had to do with, by and large, the way the communities worked and how they could act as smart contracts, and then related to that, things like items. That was the area where I was expecting a lot of the novelty to surface. And the communities were going to be using their ability to run kind of custom algorithms and things like that to be sort of uniquely curated spaces. And really, all of those ideas just didn't pan out. One by one, they sort of fell apart. We got the items in there, and that was fun, but items were really kneecapped by not being able to work outside of an individual community. You kind of expected that if you had Paul Bucks, you'd be able to give Paul Bucks to anybody in the network. But because we were relying on communities to be the way that information moved through the network, you had to be in a community in order to receive an item from that community, because otherwise you wouldn't know it happened. Likewise, the whole premise of using communities and kind of having customization of their algorithms and things proved to be difficult to really reveal as an interesting product proposition in the initial sort of thing that's handed to you. Yeah, you could like program custom algorithms, but if that's core of the product, you also need to have a lot of advanced community controls, and pretty soon you end up with what more or less amounts to a custom forum builder. And I wasn't terribly stoked about that as a product, much less the amount of work it would require to get into a good place. And honestly, nobody is super excited about moderation, being a moderator or being moderated. It's just hard work to get to that point and ends up with a product that was like, just okay. So for the past couple of weeks, we've been stepping back and looking at what are we really trying to accomplish here. And you know, it could be that those are the ideas and we just need to figure out the technology to make them move forward, but that's not really where I landed, and I feel like most of y'all were not necessarily pushing on those items and saying we got to stick with those. The cat wants in, so I'm going to let the cat in and then we'll continue here. The other thing that we've been pushing on is using our HTML superset and possibly building something that's like a Notion for social networking. And that's an interesting perspective too. I mean, in the past couple of weeks we've explored a lot of interesting ideas. We explored that idea, we explored something that's kind of wiki-like, and the automatic page creation, pulling from the semantic database and things like that. And you know, up until in the all of last week, while we were in between sessions talking about product direction, I spent most of the time futzing with WYSIWYGs, exploring what how we would build that tool for sharing, creating pages and things like that, creating interfaces. And we ended up building out some boards. And this was the canvas that we had settled on here, which is actually sorted two value props. Value prop number one being a value prop number one being a personal data server, and value prop number two being this flexible social computing toolkit, the decentralized Notion. And there's a lot about that, again, that's pretty good. But I'm not sure we need to combine those two value props. I think the personal data server is pretty strong. And the problem with the decentralized Notion for your data is that it's a complex tool, not just to build, but also to use. And so there's a degree to which, as I was thinking about it, I was starting to feel like we may be overcomplicating the product by going down that direction. Especially whenever I pop open CTZN on mobile, and I kind of spent half a moment thinking about what it would mean to build out that tool set and to use that tool set. Mobile puts you in such a small box of the number of kind of interactions you can expect and the amount of information you can take in. So expanding that beyond some really core, simple premise for what it's designed to do is overly complicated. It's a complicating thing to do, especially for something like consumer social stuff like that. On top of that, well, it's something else I'd say. One of the, I hate mobile in a lot of ways. It's a crappy computing device. And I hate mobile especially because if you're building an application, you have to think about mobile. So the constraints of mobile impose themselves on desktop. I hate that. It drives me nuts. But on the other hand, you could kind of think about mobile as being a really good representation of how people and their brains work. The amount of complexity that you could fit on mobile is actually pretty close to the amount of complexity that you ever want to be presenting people with. So if it is a tool which is clear and obvious on mobile, it's a tool that's clear and obvious on desktop as well. The other thing is, if you think about why we want to have this flexible computing toolkit, it's about opening up innovation. It's about making sure that people can create custom experiences and their own tools and things like that. And it doesn't have to be the average user that does that. As long as there's a great developer platform that enables that kind of work, that we don't necessarily need to have the end user building custom applications. It's a neat idea, don't get me wrong, I love the idea. But maybe it's not what we ought to be building right now. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a chronic overthinker when it comes to product direction. This is a pretty well-established fact about me. So, you know, there's definitely some part of me that looks back on, you know, what we've been doing for the past couple of weeks and says, well, you know, that's just me being a chronic overthinker, picking up every big idea, wanting it to all kind of pop. But I think that's the insecure version of what's happening. I think this is actually just the normal creative process. Like I said, we had an initial concept for Citizen that just didn't pan out the way I wanted it to. So the past couple of weeks of trying things out, thinking about how to surface the unique value prop, it's actually, that's just the process, you know. I'm still pretty sure I've been doing this right, you know. I don't know for sure, you know. I haven't made a big product yet. Can't say that, you know, I'm you know what it reminds me of? I don't know if anybody here watches The West Wing, but there's this episode where they're doing this like backstory kind of flashback about one of the president's political advisors, Toby. He's at a bar and he's talking to a woman. He's getting drunk in the middle of the day because he's pretty sure he's about to get fired, and this woman asks, you know, she's commiserating with him and how he's about to lose his job and everything. And she says, well, are you good? Are you a good political operative? And he says, I'm one of the best. She says, well, how many elections have you won? And he says, well, between, and then he lists off all these races he's been in. It's in like 7 different races. Between all them, I've won a grand total of 0. But you have to admire my consistency. So anyway, that's about where I am at. I'm pretty sure I know what I'm doing, but at any rate, I actually think this has been the right process, and being able to simplify the product right now, I think, connects to actually coming to an understanding about how to deliver on a unique value prop for what we're doing here. And having a flexible UI layer or having a notion for social interaction, I don't think is necessary. I think there are really 2 things beyond just a solid Twitter clone that we need to deliver. The first of them is the personal data center, or data server. The ability to run your own server, have all your data stored on that server. It's a powerful, unique value prop nobody else can offer right now, and if it works together with a well-built, functioning social media app, that is right there a great value proposition. Number 2 is just having a great open platform to build against, to build new applications against, which really goes hand in hand with the personal data center server. Because if you have a PDS, personal data server, PDS, if you have a PDS, you want to run lots of applications against it. So turning the PDS into a really great platform for applications, of course, is also sort of what enables our Twitter, because our Twitter will use that. And I think we can actually do a pretty great job of delivering on an applications platform. We'll have to see. We're going to explore this, but I think actually, especially with some of the protocol upgrades coming up, building something new could end up being building a new application on this tool set could end up being weekend project levels of fast to do. Like I was talking to Matthias, and Matthias for forever has been like, make a peer-to-peer Reddit. I want a peer-to-peer Reddit. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stick with the social thing, but I'm pretty sure you could build a peer-to-peer Reddit in a weekend once we get this tool set done. So that's where I think we're going to go with this. Is we're going to simplify Citizen to be just a really solid Twitter clone. And then get that personal data server in a really great place, and get the application platform in a really great place. So this is what you were referring to there, Sarah Path, and I'm glad to hear that you feel that way. Yeah. So thought process, keep it simple product-wise. Social networks are about content feeds, so that's what this product will be about. We're not in the desert anymore, but in the jungle. Damn straight. Yes, Michael, we are. No, that's not the final version of the pie graph. This canvas that I was showing right here, it is one iteration behind what we're going to be delivering on. This canvas here includes the flexible social computing toolkit, the decentralized notion for your data in your life, and that's the part that we're removing. We're not going to do the notion thing. Let's talk about the items in a little bit, but I think we're going to ditch the items. I think we're going to ditch items, at least in the initial product. Itty bit. So let's step through this process. We're keeping it simple product-wise. Social networks are about content feeds. That's what they're about. That's what the product should be about in terms of the application that you sit down to, right? It's about your tweets, your blog posts, your videos, your podcasts, your check-ins. That is the medium that we are playing in, so our application will be that. That's what we're going to do. And you got things like comments and DMs and stuff like that. Mainly it's about those feeds, right? Secondarily, they're launching points for other apps. That speaks to the whole platform thing. Excuse me. We don't need to boil the ocean. We give developers a way to build, and we give users a way to own their data. That's our value prop. And we give a great, straightforward social media app. So our value props are an open and easy developer platform and personal data ownership. For the personal data ownership, this one in particular is an interesting one because we have to, if we're going to deliver on that, we have to do it well, right? That has to be product level good, something that's easy to do. So the kind of thing where you can run your own server and not just like, yeah, a technical person could do it, but no, like you could like download a program, start running it on your home computer, and that's it. You don't have to set up DNS. You don't have to register or pay for some cloud server somewhere. A really great execution of the personal data center would not cost you anything to run. You could take advantage of hardware which you've already purchased. That would be the ideal version of the personal data server. You could certainly rent a cloud and put it up in there, but it shouldn't require that. It's a really interesting constraint, but I think I've cracked how to make that work. And then kind of concurrent with that would be the ability to explore your data, see it, manage all of it, see it all right there. So in a lot of ways, the personal data server, good place to look for inspiration is SyncThing. It's a great execution of a similar product. Well, you're running ahead of me, Michael. Let's get there. So on the execution, there are two separate programs. You got the personal data server, basically our platform, and then you have the Twitter clone, which is our app, Citizenry. The app runs its own mesh and syncs with the personal server. Yeah, we'll have to, let me think. Well, let me continue reading off here. The app provides the entire HTTP layer. So if there's any kind of DNS, if there's any kind of access point, for jumping into the application, it'll be on that thing, which means that the personal data server is not responsible for DNS. Personal data server can run anywhere and sync with the application. So let's diagram this out here. You know what? Runs its own mesh. Now I'm reading that. Is could be a misleading way of describing that. It has its own back end that is using the Hypercore protocol. That's what I meant by that. Historically, Citizenry, the application, has been just a single page application with no back end whatsoever, and it just talks to your personal data server. And we're going to switch that up. And we're going to switch that up because I believe it's how we can deliver on a really great personal data server execution, as well as make the application model really simple to implement. So you have an application server. Yeah, I mean, maybe I could go back someday. It's just, I don't think it's going to be what we're going to do initially. And I got mixed feelings about that, same as anybody's going to have, because it's a cool feature and everything. Just don't know if it's core. And it certainly adds a lot of complexity. I'm not hard locked on that. We could talk about it, but I would suggest that we start by looking at how we can simplify dramatically everything about the product to make sure that the other value props, the real value props, really stand out. So you got the application server and the personal data server both running on the Hypercore mesh. Now here's what's really interesting, especially in light of what Matthias and Andrew were talking about with the new, oh, kitty cat, I'm sorry. Maybe don't lay under my feet. Here's how we could do this, I believe, that's super interesting once multi-writer comes along. You got the application server, and we'll say this is CTZN.com, though we're gonna rebrand it. Yeah, we're gonna rebrand, but you got CTZN.com, and then you got no DNS, no domain name, and somebody shows up for the first time and says, "Oh, I want to do this thing. Let's create an account." So it creates an account, creates a database for you, and then you end up getting a personal data server. Personal data server. You set that up, and then you say, "Yeah, okay, I want to use this personal data server." All right, multi-writer time. We create the version of the database we create another writable user for the database on the personal data server. Just like that, you've got the application server and your personal data server cooperating on this data set. It's now in both places, writable from both places. And if the user, for whatever reason, says, you know what, I'm done with citizenry.com, but I want to keep my data, it could just delete the version of the database that's on citizenry.com. Now it owns the database, and that's that. So by using multi-writer, not only can we set up a really simple way for applications to coordinate with personal data servers, we got really great flows for introducing people into the network, for letting them start with the easy thing and then after the fact introduce the personal data server. Or you could do it in the other flow. You could start with the personal data server like so, and then say, all right, I want to use citizenry, so add it as a writer on the thing. So multi-writer becomes our system of transmission between the application and your personal data store. Absolutely could become a mesh of devices, because the personal data server could be a mesh of personal data servers on all of your personal devices. So it could actually be more than one computer, and so then, you know, it's just a matter of continuing to add writers. Just like that. Because it's a data mesh, baby. So Sarapath just asked a question that I was spending quite a bit of time thinking about yesterday myself. Will the browser app talk directly to the personal data server? Or will it talk, will it be the application server? Now at first I was thinking, well, you know, it looks like probably the way it'll have to go is that the application will, client will talk to both, you know, and the writes will get sent to the personal data server. But with multi-writer, it doesn't have to be that way, and I don't think it should be that way. So the application's front end will talk to the application's back end. All of the coordination will occur through the mesh. And because of this, your personal data server does not need to be accessible via HTTP with a public IP and a domain name and everything like that. That synchronization is occurring through Hypercore. So the building an application becomes really simple. It's almost like just building a traditional application, traditional web application, and then because of what, you know, leveraging Hypercore's mesh to its full extent, you get this ability to have it automatically synchronizing and bidirectionally synchronizing with the user's personal data set. Which means, as I said before, building your own like peer-to-peer Reddit could be a weekend project. Pretty sure that this would be a really simple thing to do. You just build an application using the Hypercore protocol as your backend, take advantage of the stuff that we've added, the semantic tables and things like that, and you're getting these benefits more or less for free, because adding in the tooling to multi-writer, adding your personal data servers, everything like that, it's just kind of a baked-in piece of the tool set of Hypercore. The application server will leverage the Hypercore mesh. Yeah. So it's basically a Hypercore native application. It's a server that is using that as its database layer, as its data layer, and we'll probably also use other facilities on Hypercore, including like push messaging. What other ways would you be looking for the browser to do it? So you're talking about running the application like in an SPA somehow. Theoretically, but it's handicapped in the same way that always is. I mean, I think you'd have a really hard time delivering a good application that way. An application needs to do a whole lot more than just talk to the personal, like the back end, the data layer of these things has to do all sorts of stuff like indexing. Not to mention the challenges of wiring together the different pieces. So I'm pretty bearish on the idea of an SPA accessing this layer. Not saying it's impossible. It's the sort of thing that I would suggest people try out in the community, if that's what your game is, but I think a traditional server, but using the Hypercore mesh as its data layer, is probably the most straightforward way to build good applications. Will I encourage schema extensions, or would the app server only use the Hypercore mesh to access existing schemas? Well, it's going to be more or less the way that we've been doing this. If a schema defines extension points, something like an extensions attribute that's just an object with no definition, then it's extensible in that way. You could do something similar to join tables or an extension table, which is a schema that references some other record in some other table and adds additional attributes, or you can just create your own schemas. If you have an application that is also that is basically using our Twitter clone and then adding features to that, those are the options on the table for that kind of approach. Does that make sense? It's really, really helpful to think about the record schemas as being similar to tables, with in a SQL database with a well-defined schema. And if you don't have, the ability to update the schema because you're not the one that created it and manages it, you could do extension tables. Get some more coffee. One thing I'd observe about this Sarah path, main reason that you might want to not have the application server touching the data would be a matter of privacy, understandable. The Twitter clone is designed to be public data. So that's the way I'm going to be building this thing. For things that need to have private data, I think you just use a different approach to the application. Maybe it would be something that you install on your device. Maybe it would be more geared towards something that you run on your own, a self-hosted sort of thing. That would be the approach I would take to that if you're trying to keep data off of the application server. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be compatible per se. It's not like it wouldn't be compatible. If you can send reads and writes to the personal data servers, then you're integrated into the mesh. So if you had an SPA, which is able to somehow get a connection to one of the personal data servers, yeah. Which, yeah, probably isn't hard. It's not how I would engineer citizenry, especially because citizenry, it's there are just constraints around that particular, like with things that are social media. One of the things that ends up dominating in a weird way, to a surprising degree, how it's built is the simple fact that you need to be able to take the URL and share it with somebody, and even if they don't have an account or anything or some application installed, they can just plug it into their browser and open it up. Because it's about sharing content, so like anything that interrupts that ability for a public social media network similar to Twitter, anything that interrupts that kind of fucks the whole thing. If you're building something more like Facebook, where you're thinking about private sharing, or something more like, I don't know, perhaps Google Drive or Signal, along those lines, that constraint doesn't exist anymore. And then other architectures make way more sense. So the way that we're approaching our Twitter clone, not the same way that every application has to be built. And I'm pretty sure that there's going to be a lot of work being done on the purely personal and private side, especially I know that the Hypercore team is interested in that kind of stuff. So I think we're going to have a pretty diverse ecosystem on that front. But for us, we're going to be continuing with our Twitter clone vibe, which is public social media. Public social media, aggregation of lots of data, that kind of thing. All right, so are we all caught up on this? I can move on to the roadmap if we are, and if not, we can keep on chatting about what we're talking about here. All right, let's keep moving on then. So roadmap. Here's where my brain is at on how to approach all this. We got a key here. Green means that it's what we'd be starting on next. Right now, that is. Orange means afterwards. Red means we're blocked on it by tech at the moment. Talk about that in a little bit. And if it's got hashed, like diagonal lines going through, I'm not 100% sure we ought to do it. So it's on there as a maybe thing to work on. Got to talk about it. Some of them I'm more sure of than others. And then some of the things that, it's all open for conversation here. But so let's start with the green ones. Green one, first of all, of course, is getting the personal data server into a good place. Making sure that premise works, things like that. I think we're going to need some form of push messaging. I think we'll give that the lines as well. Push messaging is the idea that you could basically, without writing data to a Hyper-V, you can send a message from one device to another. We currently only do it in one situation, and that is when you do remote joins or remote leaves on communities. Not having push messaging is kind of a pain. It certainly makes the system more complex. It forced us to do things like the database methods. Database methods are really cool, but they're not necessarily the ideal way of doing things. Like, you had to use a database method to update the profile of a community. It's a little more overhead that I feel like is necessary. And then something like DMs are basically way more complicated than they should be if you don't have a simple distributed RPC mechanism. So if I have a way to send a DM by telling my personal data server, hey, I'd like to send a DM, and then that message transfers with a direct connection, an encrypted connection to whoever personal data server is supposed to receive it, and then it gets put in their data store somewhere that way, that's a lot easier, obviously. If the only way we had to communicate from server to server is through the mesh, then you have to do encrypted messages that are being stored in the Hyper-Vs, which I'm not a huge fan of. At-rest encryption, of course, is effective, and you could take the point of view that if anything is being put out into the network, is effectively being published to everybody. But there is such a thing as trying to reduce the distribution of your private messages or of private information that I think could be beneficial. So I would prefer not to do things like DMs by writing encrypted messages to the Hyper-Vs. I would prefer just to have push messages. It's also helpful for things like sending notifications, friend requests, things like that to people that are not in your social network currently, which is one of the biggest pains in the butt in the way that things are designed. So having a good push messaging system, a distributed push messaging system, would be a good thing to work on, I think. I'm going to try to say your name here. I am terrible at French pronunciations. Well, let's give it a shot. Letelier? So I'm guessing that's the Utopian Workshop. Not hearing anything. Kitty cat. Meow meow.
L'atelier des utopies.
All right, close enough. L'atelier. So. I think sort of what you're asking for is like a visibility controls. Like you got DMs, which are one thing. No worries. So you got DMs, and then you have like the ability to publish a post that is intended for a specific private group. I don't think that's going to be, again, we're simultaneously building basically two different things, a platform and an application. And while the platform should be capable of basically anything that you want to build, the application that we're building is scoped by making sure that it's a simple value prop. And I'm not sure we're going to do a post visibility thing at the outset. We might look into it. But that sounds like if we're going to do it, maybe that'd be a V2 sort of thing. Sarapath, I'm not entirely sure that what you're describing helps us in any way regarding the spam question. If your solution is to send a Hypercore address by push messaging, then really what you're doing is just adding more tech, protocol, actual work, because then it's like, okay, I've received a Hypercore address, now I have to go swarm that to receive the messages. Which is fundamentally no different than just saying that there are some kinds of messages which you are, I'm happy to receive, and other kind of messages that I'm not. So put it another way, if you were to make a push-based messaging system where the pushed messages are only accepted if you're friends, right? If you have like a record saying I'm friends, then the only kind of push message that would be accepted into the inbox would be the friend request. Then all the rest of them would be rejected. It's the same basic thing, but less tech overhead. Spam prevention, of course, is immediately the question that comes up whenever you talk about accepting push-based messages. It's why I traditionally haven't done push messaging. But having fucked around for so long with, all right, no push-based messaging, it's all going to be pull-based, and trying to work around, like the communities were initially designed as a way to work around the lack of push-based messaging, but it's just not fucking clear. You have to explain to users that, like, yeah, you can only see notifications from people that are in a community with you. I don't like it. I don't like it. It makes a lot more sense, I think, to allow push-based messaging, but then just have a kind of configurable spam prevention mechanism. And if you want to configure that thing to say, yeah, only allow messages from people that are in communities or that you're following, then you'd be replicating what already exists. But if you want to create more sophisticated spam prevention rules, you can. Having that flexibility is a good thing. So, yeah, I think we ought to get push messaging in there. I think it's a good idea. Right. I just don't know if there's any necessity to leverage hypercores for the push as a part of the push messaging stack. That is a technical area that I'm going to need to talk to Andrew and Matthias about how to implement it. I am 100% sure they have ideas about how that's going to be done. So that's something I'm going to be working with them with, and so we'll see how it gets implemented. It may be that's a semi-blocked on tech question, and when I say blocked on tech, what I really mean is that I need to coordinate with Andrew and Matthias. No matter what, it will depend on, well, it'll be hyperswarm based, no question about that. But will it be sending hypercores to each other and then syncing off of that? I don't know, maybe, maybe not. I just think that may end up being unnecessary overhead, all told. I also have some Blob store reworks that I want to do. Pretty simple stuff. It's just we need to update how blobs in the Citizen network are handled so that, number one, they are easier to manage the cache of. And basically what I'm going to do is have a one-to-one correlation between a record in a Citizen table and a blob, so that if the record gets deleted, the blob can get deleted. If you don't do something like that, then you end up with a bunch of dangling blobs and no capacity to figure out whether or not they ought to get deleted. So we're going to do a little bit of reworks around the blobs, and I think also the way the blobs have worked up until now is that if you upload the blob and then you reference the blob in a record, so it's two different calls, that's kind of a pain in the ass. I think we can update the API so that basically whenever you put a record, you can attach blobs with the put call, and that will, I think, make things a little bit easier. And then blobs will also be referenced relative to the record that they're attached to, which also solves some of the namespace questions around blobs. So, nice update to get done. This one right here, the more I've been thinking about it, the more I'm pretty sure we ought to do this, and that's just simplifying the product. I imagine this will be a controversial thing, but I kind of think we ought to remove communities. Not just items, but also communities. At least for our initial product. It would simplify the technology, and it would also simplify the product. I'm not 100% sure about removing communities, but communities introduce the need for moderation, whereas follow graphs are inherently moderated by you choosing who you follow. Communities introduce the need to create algorithmic models for other people. Follow-based graphs, you choose the algorithms for yourself. So I think it would be wise, since it's not necessarily core to our value prop to have communities, to consider putting them on the chopping block. I think we might even need to consider whether or not we ought to get rid of pages in Citizen HTML. I'm not 100% sure, but we just need to take a look at the product and make sure that we're providing something which is really simple, especially because I think in a lot of ways what's going to be interesting about the Twitter clone, if it is interesting, would be perhaps the ability to get more content types into that. Like there's the basic model of having a social feed of content seems like the place where interesting innovation can happen. Would love to be able to get things like, you know, publishing videos and podcasts into there, things like that. Seems like that maybe that ought to be the direction, the focus of that product, as opposed to being focused on like building out communities. And having a simpler product, especially for the MVP, is always good. So I think we ought to really kind of take a look at the feature list inside of Citizen and say, or Citizen Re, and just say, all right, which of these could we remove and keep things nice and simple and cool to use? The aggregator model. It's another one that we got to talk through. Aggregators and algorithms are similar, but also sort of separate. Running custom algorithms requires some combination of either having So with the aggregator model, I think the simplest approach would be simply to consider the application that's providing the UI to also be the aggregator. It is a website, it's a place that you join, and it represents a community. And you can run custom algorithms by either running them on your personal data server or choosing from some facilities that we can introduce. Configuration, you know, choosing between whether or not you want a chronological feed or not. Possibly find some way to do like curated feeds. This is something that was just shared by Solo. So if we introduce a mechanism that's like a way to have a curated feed view, then an algorithm could be the thing that's producing that curated feed, or it could just be manually constructed by people. But I think the aggregation, or like the collection of data for things like search, and choosing like what comments show up and things like that, should just be the task of the application. It's a very simple model. It's one that users are familiar with. So being able to import your Twitter data and migrate easily to Citizen gets really close to this idea here, which is the social identity proofs, which is like what Keybase did, and then doing things like contact imports and things like that. Which I'm pretty open to. That does seem like the kind of thing that would be in scope for a project like this. The conversation we were having last week, we were talking about how, like, one of the things that Facebook, of course, did to kind of bootstrap their social graph was taking advantage of the social identity proofs provided by EDU email addresses. And the modern version of that is just taking advantage of the social graphs of existing social networks. So I have this as a maybe because I'm just not 100% sure we should. But I think it's a really compelling thing to think about. And if you kind of bundle it together with the idea of making an easy migration from Twitter to this, it makes a lot of sense. is basically, yeah. So I think that is worth considering for sure. Search is something that you just kind of have to do. And with the Twitter clone backend existing and being an aggregator, then implementing a search solution is actually pretty straightforward. So that should be fine. The search data set will probably not be put into Hypercore database. We'll probably just run like Elasticsearch or something similar in the back end and feed the Hypercore data set into it as changes occur. Because that's software which is optimized for search. Mentions or something else also that we just have to get around to doing. Just got to do it. Yeah, I mean, you know, the trick is really picking our battles in terms of where we're going to be putting technical novelty. Right. And that's really, Nina, that's exactly where it's at here, is having a Twitter, but hey, you own your data, and it's an open platform. The open platform can mean a lot of different things, but the main thing it's going to mean is just being able to build other applications against the same data sets, against your personal data store. How much we can introduce extensibility into the Twitter clone is an interesting question, one that I think we should explore, but I don't think is 100% necessary. Certainly, you know, it would be adding more to the open platform value prop, but if we don't have a way to have like custom post types right out of the gate, I think that's okay. It's a complicated feature to get in. I think it's super interesting. But, you know, it's one of those things, not 100% sure that's required for this to be a successful product. So really picking our battles on where we try to innovate versus just delivering a high-quality base experience, I think is a good idea for how we're doing this. Because we spend a lot of time being jammed up by, you know, it's the next iteration of no novel pains in the butt. We need to be able to deliver a really good base experience and focus on only focus on where our value proposition is, and that's having personal data ownership and an open platform against that personal data store. On the personal data server, there's going to be a lot of tools that need to exist over there. Things like data retention controls, you know, like do I want to have backups of things that were deleted, or can we go ahead and delete old versions of things? A nice tool to explore your data sets and see what's in there. So, you know, something that's kind of almost like a file explorer, but for semantic data, so that, you know, we have this already with the, to some degree with the admin, where I can browse through the tables, but, you know, make this something that's user-facing and nice to use in that regard. Really helps kind of reify your data ownership to be able to see, oh, there are all my posts, and there are all my comments, how neat, you know, that kind of thing. And it's useful for also kind of understanding how where your data usage is at, things like that. Data access controls for read, write, and write, and then things like backup and restoration for your keys and your data. That's stuff that we're going to need to coordinate with the Hypercore protocol team on. This is the stuff that they are actively working on. But I'm pretty sure that we'd be crazy not to bank on them for the product. They're the kind of things that will make this interesting. So however we go at this, we're going to need to, and I'm going to be talking to them about a timeline on this. But we're going to need to be working with them to be building off of that technology. And there may be a situation where our pipeline gets a little bit blocked up waiting for some of those features. And so we may have a little bit of flex time in which we maybe implement some other features like, oh, okay, well, that's not done, so let's go ahead and get DMs in there, things like that. But we'll have plenty of time, I think, or plenty of stuff to do, because we also have things like the server-side SDK and the client-side SDK and SSO. SSO. SSO may actually not be required in the same way. That is the idea. There is to be able to leverage the personal data store, basically for an application. So, however that however we do that, yeah, we'll have to look into the right way to do that. You know, SSO, of course, is just like being able to pop onto a application, click sign in with my Hypercore thing, and then click your identity and you're good to go. So we'll have to think about how to execute on that. I guess it'll be connected to the broader idea of wiring up in general any Hypercore-based application with your personal data store, choosing, you know, which databases it's going to be leveraging. And then, you know, you got stuff that's specific to our Twitter clone. Like, do we want to get custom post types and post creators going? Is that a part of the execution we want to do? Want to get embedded apps via iframe? Do we want to get citizen HTML going? Things like that. All kind of up in the air. How much extensibility do we want to bake into our Twitter clone kind of thing? So that's, I think, our roadmap going forward here. So I'm not actually going to do a long stream today. In fact, I'm going to cut it off in just a couple of minutes here, because Andrew actually has some time to take a call, so we can start to sync up on some of the what's going on with all of our red items here. I appreciate you pulling for it, and, you know, it was really useful. This has all been great. So for the rest of the stream, next 10-15 minutes, just open for any questions or further conversation about what we're laying out here. But I think that this gives us a pretty clear direction moving forward. I feel really good about both the value proposition and also the technical architecture for this. And I think this will be fun and interesting. So does anybody have any questions, thoughts, concerns, anything like that? Woohoo! Appreciate that, Letelier. Just for the sake of conversation, what it sounds like you're kind of thinking about having a nice tool set for like social media sharing privately with your family, friends and family kind of thing. Grab some more coffee. Me too. Yeah, I feel a really clear direction. Yeah. For private sharing, I would really love to get some version of, if you really want to take advantage of of private sharing and make it feel like a real win, it would just be fantastic if it stayed off of any third-party server, you know? So the model that we're approaching with our Twitter clone doesn't capture on a privacy value prop in a meaningful way. And if you want to do that, you really just need the applications to be running entirely on the user's devices, or at least as a single page application, but really you want it on the user's devices. I think, I'm pretty sure that over time that will become, especially like once the device mesh gets into a really good place, that'll become a lot easier to do. The interesting challenge with that kind of work, of course, whenever there is no server, mobile devices gets harder. And then linkability gets a little harder as well, which is in many ways the main reason that I think that an application server ought to exist in the Twitter clone, because you just really need to be able to capture a link and send it out to anybody. But when it's a privacy focus, or just kind of personal sharing, it's a different story. If it's the kind of thing where, we'll have to look at, I don't know, we'll have to take a look at it at some point. Perhaps, there is a certain kind of thing where you're just trying to control the post visibility. It's not so much about really sensitive stuff. I don't know. We might look at at-rest encryption. We might also look at being able to set up like multi-writer databases that are owned not just by an individual in the app server, but also writable by like everybody that's a party to the group. And so then you'd be able to set up a situation where, yes, the application server is able to see the data, but only that's the only third party that's able to see it, because you would just control who has who is aware of the database. But you could also look at just doing at-rest encryption of posts. Those are the two kind of options to get involved. But even if you're doing at-rest encryption, the application server would have visibility because it would be the one encrypting the data whenever it's doing a write. But it's worth taking a look at. It's definitely V2 territory for the application. Sounds good. I don't know if I've got any fellow Austinites on the stream right now, but it is humid. Like swelteringly humid right now. Ugh. Phone says 77%. We're supposed to have rain pretty much all week. I'm dying right now. All right, well, I think that seems to be everything from everybody. So sorry for the short stream today, but still in the zone of having to coordinate a lot. And right now, the best thing I could do is get on the phone with Andrew Osheroff and start talking about all this and start figuring out those red items. So we'll pick up tomorrow. I'll find some tasks to get started with, and we'll just start digging into all this. thanks everybody for sticking with me through the past couple of weeks, which I know has been interesting. I'm really glad that it's come out the way that it has, and I've enjoyed doing it with y'all. It's been a really, as always, a really great way of working on this project. So have a great rest of your Monday, and I will catch you all tomorrow. Later, everybody. Citizens.